I'd like to welcome you to this webcast, Surprising New Research on Business-to-Business Optimized Voice of the Customer, Evidence for What Really Works. These webcasts are produced by the Product Development and Management Association. PDMA is the world's largest professional organization of new product development professionals. Hello, my name is Mark Hart, the moderator for today's webcast. I'm a PDMA volunteer and certified new product development professional. Our presenter is Dan Adams. Dan is the founder of the AIM Institute, which stands for Advanced Innovation and Marketing. Dan is the author of New Product Blueprinting, the B2B Organic Growth newsletter, and the weekly blog, Awkward Realities. He's a chemical engineer and holder of many patents and innovation awards, including a listing in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Dan's front-end of innovation work with his client DuPont led to a novel online training model for which he and his co-author received PDMA's Best Article of the Year award. During this presentation, Dan will refer to resources that are available at www.aimwhitepapers.com. The discovery interview and preference interview documents include the new research on B2B VOC.
Well, let's dive right in and take a look at the agenda. So we're going to talk about the organic growth imperative and then why it's a great time to be a B2B supplier. We'll get into these divergent and convergent interviews, and we'll share some results which were at least surprising to me and actually quite encouraging. We're going to start with this organic growth imperative. So there's a couple of growth problems that I see. Here's the first one. Your boss is planning the operating plan, and he or she says, you know, we had 5% growth this year, so we really ought to be able to hit 8% next year. The problem is there's actually several types of growth. A lot of that growth was inherited growth. People who've now had their gold watch handed to them were responsible for some of that. There's others, it's just the market is growing at a certain rate, and we're coasting along with it. In fact, there's only a small bit, which I would call earned growth. This is what happens when our company does better than anybody else in meeting customers' needs. It's often not a very large part of that 5%. It's the only growth we can control. But we kind of get lulled into a sense of complacency because the other growth is really masking problems we may have in our growth capabilities. The other problem is similar. It looks a little bit like this. Your fearless leader says, hey, the market's growing at 3%, so we ought to be able to hit 6% next year. Anybody have that happen to them? Well, I wonder what our competitors are saying in those same meetings. Are they planning on growing at 3%, less than 3%, or more than 3%? Sure. So all the suppliers are planning on growing at a faster rate than the market's growing. As Dr. Phil would say, how's that working for you? So how are we going to succeed while the competitors fail? How will we offer more customer value than all of them? So to get a sense for this, let's get a historical perspective first. Some of you may remember the quality wave where Dr. Deming went over to Japan after American business leaders did not listen to him. And a little company called Toyota started in, and it turned out that the Japanese auto producers went from 3% to 30% global car production. So the point is being early or late for a wave has consequences. Then we moved into the productivity wave with lean and business process reengineering. Now we're clearly in the innovation wave. 100 books are being written per week, which must mean we haven't figured it out yet. But there's a difference. This applies to current operations, but this wave applies to future sales. We're talking about unlimited potential here. I think this wave will make the earlier ones look like ripples. It's all about getting to profitable, sustainable, organic growth. And what we're going to do today is talk about the science of B2B customer insight and roll up our sleeves and look at some hard data on what we're now learning, really for the first time. We've just collected this within the last several weeks, actually. First, let's talk about what companies are doing today. According to Bob Cooper, father of StageGate and a brilliant researcher, when companies begin measuring their success rates at the beginning of the development stage, when they're starting to spend money, they have a 25% success rate. Compare that to Six Sigma. We got 3 defects per million attempts. Here we have 3 defects per 4 attempts. Nowhere else do we tolerate this level of waste and inefficiency. Something's got to change. Now, what might that be? Let's think about this. Does your company have bright R&D people? Probably the answer is yes. That's how you're able to meet some customer needs. But what about your competitors? Do they also have bright R&D people? Yeah, unfortunately, they probably do. Well, how will your company win? So, what if your R&D worked only on problems that customers truly cared about, while competitors kept guessing what to work on? Now, when I say they keep guessing, I'm going to start showing you some evidence that we did not have before very recently that shows that, yeah, for the most part, B2B suppliers really are guessing. And that's the part that's quite interesting. So I think we have 2 innovation problems to solve. What's the right question? What's the right answer? In other words, what are the market needs and what are our solutions? If we ask which of these problems consume most of our innovation investment, the research says that about 89 to 90% of the total project spend is coming into the solution area. If we ask, well, where does the problem really start? It's really over here. Problem 1 is the #1 cause of most failures. It's been that way for a long time, in fact. So we have this problem of underinvestment, but it actually gets worse than this. And let me explain. So imagine you've got a stage gate process, which I think is very valuable. We'll talk about later on how that can fit into the overall scheme of success. But if you ask, well, where does that idea come from? On the left, is it our idea or is it the customer's? Most people will tell you, well, it's our idea. And then you could ask the question, well, okay, fine. You're starting with an assumed customer need. You go validate your product, you develop the product. And then a reasonable question would be, well, when do you really check market needs? After a bit of hemming and hawing, if you had this conversation with many companies, they'll finally say, well, I guess we launch our product and we see if anybody buys it. And what we're going to propose is that we flip this around. We start with market needs, not end with market needs. It is true that one way of testing market needs is to launch products at customers. You know, they're going to love the next one, whoosh, incoming rounds, incoming products from our suppliers. And so this is an awkward reality. I believe this and many other awkward realities will be things that companies will look at and laugh about in 20 years and 30 years. I mean, there may be less efficient ways of testing market needs than this, but I don't know what those would be, than to develop the entire product and then just launch it at the customer. We have a lot of other awkward realities. Every Friday, if you want to join us for our weekly blog, we'd love to have you there. So that's a little bit about the organic growth imperative. Let's talk about why it's a wonderful time to be a B2B supplier instead of consumer goods. So imagine you make belts. Would it make a difference if you were selling conveyor belts to other businesses or dress belts to consumers? Well, I believe the B2B customer is capable of giving you much more insight for a number of reasons. First of all, they have a lot more knowledge than the typical consumer has about how their product will be used. Second, there's more interest. You could have great financial impact and make a hero, that engineer, at work. How much interest does a consumer have? Well, we have to pay them to come to a focus group, so that gives us a clue. The objectivity is higher, not because they're naturally rational in all cases, but because there's a lot of reasons where they have to be. Consumers are notoriously fickle. And then the foresight is greater. I would guess that virtually all of your customers, if you're in B2B, are themselves in business to make money. So they can tell you what it takes to reduce their costs, increase your sales, and so forth. Concentration tends to be high. Instead of millions of buyers, we have relatively few buyers here. So what is basically the next question? Well, if your B2B customers are knowledgeable, they are able to help you design better products. If they are interested, they are willing to do so. If they're objective, they make rational, stable, understandable decisions. They can discuss their needs with you before seeing the prototype. And by the way, many of the movements today are very powerful, like lean startup, and you should look at those, minimum viable product. But for heaven's sake, don't just make prototypes and lob them at your customers. If you could have an intelligent conversation and they could give you all this insight beforehand. Then concentration, we can directly engage these people. So I would say these are great advantages, but an advantage is no advantage unless we take advantage of it. So that's where we're going next. How can we take advantage of these wonderful characteristics of a B2B customer? So let's talk about divergent and convergent interviews. This is the key to success. And when we talk about these interviews, the one thing that we want to be really clear about is something called customer outcomes. Tony Alwick did a wonderful job of popularizing this concept. It's extremely powerful. It's nothing more than a desired customer end result. It's what the customer wants to have happen without any regard to how it happens. Now, I've come to believe very strongly in two principles, and I'm going to put these up here quickly, and I'd invite you to think through these yourself. I believe that customer value is only created when an important unmet outcome is improved. It could be a process we're improving for customers. It could be a product we're improving. It could be direct customer. It could be down the value chain. But I do not believe we create value in our factories or our laboratories. It's only at the customer's operation or product. Number two, I believe our only path to profitable, sustainable growth is creating value for customers. Yes, we can cut costs. Yes, we can buy market share. But none of these things are both profitable and sustainable. You think about this after our webcast, and you agree with me on this. Does it make sense that the better you understand outcomes, the better your growth will be? Or another way of saying that is, can we get beyond thinking of this as just another box to check? Oh yeah, voice of customer, ought to do that also. What I would like to convince you is, in today's environment, this is the key today to profitable, sustainable, organic growth. Much as in the quality wave, the key to getting the quality right was getting rid of the inspectors at the end of the line and beginning to go upstream to use statistical process control. So let's take a look at these outcomes. We call blueprinting the science of B2B customer insight. In the same way that a microbiologist would take a specimen, slide it under the microscope, we're going to take customer outcomes, slide it under the microscope, and start turning up the magnification. And there's really 9 levels we want to look at. Some will be done in divergent discovery interviews, some in convergent preference interviews, and some in the rest. In a bit, we'll take a look at the 7 steps of blueprinting. Shame on me, but it took me like 9 years to figure out what was really happening with blueprinting. And this is what's really happening, whether we remember it or not. It's not key. So let's take a look at this then. And let's, by the way, you can dig more deeply into this by looking at the Catch the Innovation white paper that Mark mentioned at the top of the hour. So we really have 2 types of risk. We've got technical risk and we've got commercial risk. So when do we resolve our technical risk? Most people would say, well, we resolve that in a development stage. I mean, that's what it's there for. At the end of development, we're either certain we can make this technically or we are certain we cannot. When do we resolve our commercial risk? Well, as I mentioned, most companies, if they're being very frank and honest with you, will say we launch our products and then within a year or 2, we'll see if the customers like it. So that's how we resolve our commercial risk. And what we're saying is you can build a certainty time machine. By diverging and converging on these outcomes, which we'll explore a little bit more carefully, you can know what needs to be known. In fact, almost everything that you need to know in B2B is knowable before development. Not so much with consumer goods. I may have to show you a video, let you play with a video game before you know if you like it. I may have to let you taste a snack food or look at a new tie to see if you're going to like it in consumer goods. There's a lot more on this in the white paper called Timing is Everything, which I co-wrote with a gentleman from Corning. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to move from solution push, which is level 1, where we start with our ideas and we launch the solutions, up to solution level 2, solution validation, where we still start with our ideas, but we at least go out and validate them, all the way to level 3, which is we go up and we diverge and converge. Now, there is an advantage of going to level 2. If you have an obvious dud, the customer will most likely say, that's a really bad idea. But what we want to do is get all the way up here to level 3. There's a couple problems with level 2. First is a confirmation bias. If I go out and say, what do you think about my cool new idea? There's a very strong likelihood I'll hear what I want to hear, and my customer will tell me what they think I want to hear. But the larger problem is this. I may think I'm understanding market needs, but I am not. I'm only understanding market reaction to one idea, my idea. So how do we resolve this? Well, we have a new product blueprinting process. We can't go through this whole thing, but it's what happens before you go into product development and product launch. It's the front end of innovation. And we're going to focus today on the qualitative discovery interviews and the quantitative preference interviews. The first one is divergent. What else, Mr. Customer? The second one is convergent. Let's focus on what really matters. And so there are 5 parts of a typical discovery interview. We'll start with just 2 or 3 easy log current state questions. Then we'll ask the customer, let's say we made paint resins. What kind of problems are you having? Well, they'll talk about food stains and getting pencil marks off and paint that should cover everything. We put one outcome per sticky note. Then we say, what's your ideal world look like? And again, they are telling us what these ideas are, these outcomes are. And then we have special triggers. We get them thinking in fresh new ways. But again, it's one outcome per sticky note. And finally, we isolate their top picks, what they most want to see us work on. So what we're going to do is we're going to check out about a 1.5-minute video. We'll pick up the action as the moderator begins the problem section of the discovery interview. Watch for these 2 cases. First, when the moderator keeps probing an idea the customer has given. And the second case, when the moderator asks, what else? When she has finished probing an idea.
Okay, thanks for your help with those current state questions. Really filled in some of the gaps we had. Now, the rest of this meeting is about whatever is important to you. Nicole, can you take us back to that agenda at the top? You've got it. First, let's talk about problems. Anything is fair game here. It could be something in your manufacturing process or something your customers would like to see go away.
Well, in our focus groups, customers always say that it was easier to clean food stains from painted surfaces.
Any types of food in particular?
Homeowners can't always clean stains like mustard, barbecue sauce, ketchup, and so on, especially by just using common household cleaners.
Okay. What other problems are you having?
Well, this isn't a problem that our customers have, but we do in our manufacturing process, and that's grit particles. When resin suppliers don't filter their latex well before delivering it to us, it causes problems for us.
What kind of problems, Bob?
Well, we could ruin a whole batch, and that means we have to scrap out the pigments and all the other ingredients.
Does this ever become a problem for your customers as well?
Never. Our QC catches the problem before it gets to our customers.
Okay. What else?
I'll stop it here. Now, when that moderator from the supplier asked what else, did she have any idea of what the customer was going to say? She really didn't, did she? This is why we call this a customer-led interview, not a supplier-led interview. Many suppliers still go in with questionnaires and interview guides, and it feels like the interview belongs to the supplier. What we want to do is have this interview feel like it belongs to the customer. That's why we project notes. That's why we let them lead. There's a lot of other dynamics that come into play on this whole thing. All right, let's go back to the deck of slides and pick up where we left off. Imagine you went out and you interviewed 6 to 10 customers in a key market segment. Now you go back and you do your preference interviews, which are quantitative. I'm not going to show you what that looks like due to time, but imagine you were interested in the paint hiding power, and you ask the question, how important is hiding power on a scale of 1 to 10? And how satisfied are you with the hiding power you get today on a scale of 1 to 10? Then imagine for the entire market, the average importance score was 9, and the average satisfaction score was 6. The satisfaction gap calculation is importance times 10 minus satisfaction. So in our case, it's a 36% market satisfaction gap. Now what we've learned in every imaginable industry around the world for many, many years is this. If you get a market satisfaction gap of around 30% or more, that is your indication that the market is eager to see you work on this. So we've had many, many teams, and you're going to see this in a little bit, find that they thought factory mix time would be really cool, and the customers were not interested, or they thought that the customers are not interested in hiding power, and they were terribly interested, or they might have even found something new, like scrub resistance they weren't even imagining. So that came up in the divergent discovery interviews. So the difference our blueprinting teams see after the interviews versus what they thought would happen before are dramatically different. And that's the surprising new research I'm going to share in a couple of minutes. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to eliminate innovation errors. In divergent qualitative interviews, we want to stop errors of omission, that is, overlooking unarticulated needs. Now, no team is ever punished for an error of omission because nobody knows they omitted it until maybe 5 years later when a competitor comes up with a blockbuster. Lots of teams become aware that they were committing errors of commission because they launch their product and the customer yawned. And that's something we now know we can change. Now, let's get to the fun part, and then we'll get into the Q&A for a bit here. So the new research that we've completed, you can download this at the same place that Mark mentioned earlier. Discovery interviews are avoiding errors of omission, preference, avoiding errors of commission. Each of these is like a 12-page report. This comes from a pretty heavy-duty survey response that we've had from our clients. This one comes by doing a very deep dive with 35 project teams who are using new product blueprinting from 14 different companies. And you can see in both cases, you know, there's hundreds of interviews represented. So there's a great deal of experience that came into play here. Let's look first at the discovery interviews. So the first thing we want to know was, as a result of the training, are you better able to probe? And we were delighted to see that, you know, almost 90% said, yeah, we definitely are getting better at this. So that's what we want to do. Keep in mind, this is their first time, you know, at the rodeo. They were just learning these skills. They were just getting out. So as time goes on, we can get even better at this. But that was helpful. But then we asked 3 questions. The first one was, were you learning at a deeper level? And you can see the response is, yeah, we were learning at a much deeper level. Now, if you're learning a deeper level of things that don't matter, that's not good. So the next question was, well, the stuff you were learning at a deeper level, was it valuable to you? And yeah, it was valuable to us. Now, the next question was, you were learning at a deeper level, it was valuable to you, but did you already know that? And the answer was, about half of them agreed or strongly agreed that no, we didn't know this before. So now, to be clear, it is still valuable to learn something you already knew because you get confirmation, you get confidence, you can move faster, you get more management buy-in, all these things. But what we're finding is it's deep understanding, it's valuable, and we didn't know a great deal of this before. So that's the discovery interview. So if we ask a question, were we diverging, learning things we didn't know before? The answer is generally, yeah, we are. Now we get to what I think is the big surprise, the aha here. We go to preference interviews. These teams have got their market satisfaction gaps. They've done their discovery interviews. And we're asking them, overall, how much have these interviews impacted the design of your new offering? In other words, what that new product or offering or service is going to actually look like. This blew me away. 86% said it had a great or significant impact on their product design. So I do not have the kind of mind that can bend spoons, but after careful deliberation, here's the conclusion that I've come to. These teams probably would have developed a very different product than what they did develop. What product would they have developed? One that probably would not have been in touch with the needs of those B2B customers. So here we are learning 2 things, in my view. One, these interviews are capable of teaching them a great deal they didn't know, and that's why it's a significant great impact. But here's the other thing. Beyond just blueprinting, what does this tell us about the average B2B supplier represented by these 14 very large companies? What does it tell us about their level of insight? It means they probably didn't have a very strong idea of what those customers wanted before the interviews, if the change was this dramatic. So that was the first aha. The second one, which is rather alarming, was this. How much of these interviews change your original project scope? Now, to be clear, a project scope is different than a product design. Project scope is saying, what is it you are even going to work on? And what we're finding is about half the teams went into these markets saying, we would like to talk to you about X. And significant and great change was made in what X was. It turned into Y or Z. They didn't even have the right topics. So let's go back to that original research where we said there's only a 25% success rate. I believe this begins to shed some light on why companies are struggling. What we're finding is these companies, in many cases, have the wrong idea of what that new product should look like in terms of design. And in many cases, they're not even talking about the right topic area. So a couple more. There's many charts in these research reports. I'm going to share two more. Maybe these customers could have learned this using any voice of customer technique. So it seemed a fair question was, how much insight does blueprinting provide versus other voice of customer methods? And here you can see a pretty strong vote of confidence for the blueprinting, divergent, and convergent methodologies. And then finally, I'll just share one last one. We asked them, if this is adopted across your company, how would this impact the success of projects? And so there was a lot of enthusiasm for that. So when we finish up in just a few minutes, if we want to, we can talk a little bit more about the results. I can pull up the research papers, answer your questions. But let me close with one last slide because I think this question often comes up, and I'd like to maybe deal with it visually. And that is, well, how does this all fit with my stage gate process? Because you know, for several decades, if the boss said, we need better innovation, the automatic reaction was, well, let's go put a stage gate process in. So to be very, very clear, I am a fan of stage gate processes. I think they do a lot of good. But I also think they are there primarily for the benefit of the company. They manage the interface between the company and the project team. And we need them. Why do we need them? Resource planning, portfolio analysis, financial budgeting. All these reasons we need to have the stage gate in place. But left to themselves, they can lead to analytical thinking, checklist mentality, and so forth. So keep the interface between the company and the project team, but let's add another interface on. That's the interface between that same team and the customer. This is where we need the customer insight skills. We need the first to eliminate and reduce mistakes, but it's this top interface that's going to drive breakthroughs. And so that's where we want to see a lot of energy put. So this may be a shocker, but I think 30 minutes in, I think I'm actually done, Mark. Let's see if we've got any questions. I'd be delighted to have a little more of a discussion now about anything we've talked about or anything that's on anybody's mind, frankly.
Well, thanks, Dan. I've still digesting some of those new insights. So our first question, do you generally see this process being led by a sales representative to the customer or by a company specialist in this type of discussion? Who initiates this change of perspective?
Yep.
Or
Perfect, yeah. First of all, some people who train in VOC say, leave your salespeople out of it, they can sell, but they can't listen. Well, if I had a sales force that couldn't listen, I'd get a new sales force. So our experience is you do not want to leave your sales professionals out of this. I think if you do, you'll get behind customers who are more forward-thinking. Having said that, your real question is who drives it. We normally see a multifunctional team driving this. It's heavy on marketing. It's heavy on technical. There is some sales representation, but generally in terms of the team leadership, in terms of the drive, we're usually seeing it coming out of marketing or out of technical. The sales role tends to be one in which they are very actively involved. They're helping set up the interviews. They're at the interviews. But it's relatively rare that the salesperson is a moderator. For one thing, it's difficult for them to ask questions if they've been calling in that customer for 10 years. Easier for somebody from the home office. So multifunctional, generally led by marketing, and then I would say number two, led by technical.
Well, Dan, to get back to that, who initiates, in other words, puts up their hand and says, we need to change. We need to get that 6% growth. Let's try this. Who's putting up their hand first?
Yep, that is generally going to be the business leader. It could be somebody on the business leader's staff who is like maybe a technical person or a marketing person or somebody who's overseeing new product development. But at the end of the day, for this initiative involves change. It's a different way of doing things. If it's going to be successful, that leadership team, the general manager, the vice president, the group president, they need to say, you know, we're looking for a competitive advantage. And that competitive advantage, we think, is making sure we understand customers' needs better than our competition. So it's a business leadership initiative that works on this. Okay, well, our next question comes down to how do you allocate company resources for a particular item? Historically, most folks say, here's our budget last year, we're going to work off that. How do you change the allocation of resources to add in this new item? Great question. What we tell people is move your resources up and out. And here's what we mean by that. We say in a normal product development process, you're spending 90% of your project spend on the solution, on the answer. Research shows that should be more like 70 or 80%, and you should be spending not 10% on the front end, but 20 to 30%. You'll be more successful. So first, take the same darn resources and move them up. Second, move them out. Instead of sitting around in our conference room in our laboratories talking to ourselves, let's get out there and let's talk to customers and let's do it in an intelligent fashion. I often get this response from executives saying, I don't think I've got the resources for this. And I say to them, well, listen, what if you could double, and by the way, the background is this, about half of R&D at any one point in time is working on products that will not be successful. Okay, that's just the statistics that we see. So I say to the executive, how would you like to double your R&D? They already know your technology, they know your products, they know your customers. They can start tomorrow, and by the way, you won't have to pay them an extra penny. And the executives go, wow, that's great. Yeah, I like that. How do we do that? I say it's easy. Just kill all the dumb projects you're working on, and that'll free up half your resources. And they say, that's brilliant, Adams. Which half do I kill? And I say, I have no idea. But I say, if you will do what we're talking about, these new product blueprinting methods, a year from now, you will know which projects were done. In fact, I'll tell you what, you won't even have to kill them, sir or ma'am. Your teams will kill them for you because nobody wants to work on a dud. They want to work on winners. So that's it. I think, Mark, move them up, move them out, keep the same resources. You might even be able to do it with less resources. Okay. Next question. How far do you take late discovery interviews? How do you probe on how to tackle the more recent problems or gain additional insights that you may not have been apparent 6 months or a year ago? I mean, this is about front end. How do you bring in evolution? Yeah. So in other words, there might be some new needs. How do you make sure that you don't start your project perhaps and you hear these outcomes, and then at the end of the project, you're working on something that was true a long time ago but it's no longer true? Is that the question? Well, it's partly that. It's partly the marketplace has changed, the perception has changed. Yeah. How do you fit some of these changes back into let's say a stage gate process where? Great. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that's great. So I think there's two answers. One is we do not like to see people parachute in, interview the customer, say so long, and that's it. What we like to see is continual engagement. And for one reason, is just the one you suggest here. We don't want to lose track of changes in a marketplace. But the other reason we like to see that is in B2B, we have two goals. One is customer insight. That's no different than B2C. But our second goal, especially in a concentrated industry, is customer engagement. And here's what I mean by that. Let's say I'm B2B, I'm serving a highly concentrated industry, and maybe if I look at the top 10 potential buyers in a market segment, it might represent 20%, 50%, 80% of the market buying power. Would it not be an incredible shame for me to go and do those interviews and not to do them in a way that impresses those potential customers where they say, wow, everybody else came in here and tried to sell us what they had. That supplier was really listening to us. So I'm going to try to engage them. How do I do that? By continual contact during the entire process. I'm basically pre-selling them before I know what it is that I'm going to even make. So I think part of the answer is continual engagement with those customers. But there's also something else I'd like to touch on very briefly. If I go and do my interviews around solutions, we find those to be much more transient. If I go and do my interviews on the underlying fundamental outcomes, we find these to be very stable over time. So it doesn't change nearly as rapidly as you would think if we do the interviews based upon outcomes.
Got it. Okay, our next question gets into the area where something is perhaps not so cleanly business to business. So the question is, if someone's in a company that has consumer products, but they have a retailer or a distributor in between, can you offer any suggestions of how your insights might apply to those kind of companies?
Yes. And this happens quite often. And okay, here's true confession time. We make a big deal out about B2B because it's a simple message, it's easy to understand. But the fact of the matter is, if we just said B2B versus B2C and called it black and white, we would be doing a grave disservice. The fact is there is a range of B2B versus B2C. Let me just, I don't know if it's possible for us to put this up afterwards or if people want to drop me an email, but we have a new free service called, it's www.b2b, it's number 2, B2B marketview.com. And when somebody goes there, they can dial in the characteristics of their customers, and they will get a B2B index. And if it's a very, very B2B market, it'll be 100. If it's a very, very B2C market, it'll be down, close to 0. So here's the point I'd like to make. I would say if you are selling into consumer goods and there is not much knowledge, interest, foresight, and so forth involved, if you're selling, dress belts and purses and things like that, I don't think that our methodology is what you want to do. But we have many clients who make products where the customers, even though they are B2C, are in fact knowledgeable, interested, and so forth. Imagine this scenario. Imagine I make sealant that is used for the repair of automobile engines. On one hand, I've got garages buying it. That's B2B, right? But I've also got shade tree mechanics, homeowners who like to rebuild their engines. Are they interested in something that works? You bet. Are they knowledgeable about the engine? You bet. So even though it is technically B2C, we think that B2B versus B2C is too crude, and so we recommend using the B2B index, and that will actually tell you whether our methods should be used or not. The more B2B, the more industrial, the more our methods work.
Dan, could you repeat that URL, please?
Yes, www.B2B Market View, all one word, B2BmarketView.com. And people can go out there and they can answer 16 questions, and it will tell them their B2B index and what comprises it: knowledge, interest, foresight, and so forth.
So let's go to a question from Mel. How would you integrate this voice of customer process with fast prototyping and other quick response methods and still see improved success rate at the end?
Great question. So I would put this before the minimum viable product, the fast prototyping. If some people listening in are students of Lean Startup, let me tell you, I think that's a great approach. We recommend that to our clients. But here is the danger that people run into if they don't think this through carefully. I pick up Lean Startup by Eric Ries's fantastic book. I don't really pay attention that there's like 97% of the examples are pure consumer goods. I get all excited about it. So you know what? I'm going to do fast prototyping. Well, if you're doing a consumer software program, a game or something like that, as many of the examples work, the only way you're going to get feedback from your customers is by saying, please try this game out and tell me if you like it. Now, If you do that in B2B, if you go and make your next pump prototype or your next welding machine prototype or your next polymer prototype, and you haven't even gone in to ask the customers in a very simple 2-hour interview, it's a colossal level of inefficiency. Because they are knowledgeable, they have foresight, they are interested, they would love to have told you all kinds of information. So it's a terrible mistake, in my view, in B2B situations to start with fast prototyping. But I love it when you combine the two together. So I don't know if some of you may remember, there's a learn, build, measure. It's a build, measure, learn cycle in lean startups. Build, measure, learn. We're saying keep that, but add another learn step to the front end. And if you remember what Eric Ries has, it's got a circular diagram. We're just saying start to learn earlier because your customers are able to tell you what they need. If somebody's interested, when they go out to aimwhitepapers.com, the same place we're sending you for everything else, the 4th paper down is a white paper called Lean Startup for B2B. And go into this. Here's another danger of applying Lean Startup out of the box. If I've got 1 million consumers, I can keep lobbing those prototypes at them, and I won't get prototype fatigue. If I've got 10 major customers, they're going to spend a lot of money checking out my B2B prototype, and I do not want them to be wasting their money on things that they don't want. So there's a lot of reasons we have to be a little bit careful, but it's still enthusiastic about Lean Startup.
Okay, well, the next question is from John, and he would like to get your insights on the suggested group size. So he's, let's say, maybe familiar with focus groups, but for these kind of discovery interviews, is it a similar number of participants, or is it vastly different?
It's not too much different. So what we find works really well is if when you're doing your discovery or your preference interviews, you've got that 2 to 6 person range. Now, sometimes you only have one person you're interviewing in B2B, but we know that on average, 5 to 6 individuals at a B2B customer are influencing or making decisions. So we like to see that sort of a room size of people for discovery, because then we get good springboarding, idea generation. It's kind of like a brainstorming session. You would never do a brainstorming session with one person. So that's why we try to shoot for that. There's not too many people so that somebody's voice isn't heard, but there's enough people they can build off each other. That's discovery, divergent. We also like to get a similar size group for the B2B, the preference convergent interviews. Why? A different reason entirely. Here, it's not a matter of springboarding or idea generation. It's a matter of getting everybody involved who would make that business decisions voices heard. So what happens, you get a lot of debate going on. Mr. Customer, how important is scrub resistance on a scale of 1 to 10? One person says, oh, it's a 9. Another person says, oh, it's a 3. You don't put a 6 in, okay? You say, tell me why. And one person says, well, I'm in marketing and I can sell more of this with scrub resistance. I want a 9. Somebody says, I'm in manufacturing and, it doesn't do me a bit of good. I give it a 3. I would ask, from the standpoint of your whole company, how important is this? The manufacturing person will say, well, listen, if you can sell more, Sue, give it a 9. I cannot have that discussion unless I've got everybody in the room. That's why we approach it that way.
If someone has had the insight to connect up with you or someone like you, they might have an unfair competitive advantage. They might be producing more winners than they used to. Can you compare this to other folks that maybe focus on, let's call it, in Eric Ries's terminology, a vanity metric like cycle time, or another metric like velocity, that maybe from a Scrum perspective? So can you compare this idea of going in smarter as opposed to just going faster?
Sure, that's a great question. So our clients that measure this generally agree that the 25% success rate, starting at the beginning of the development stage, which of course is right after front end ends, right? Starting at that point is about 25% success rate when they start with us. But what they tell us is after they get moving with this methodology, they bumped it up to 75%. They flipped that around. So the projects that are starting in the development stage, about 3 out of 4 are successful. Now, some are going to fail because the technology just isn't there. Now, so where does the success come from? Well, a lot of it comes from killing things in the front end. Now, sometimes we have clients who come up with wonderful ideas they never would have thought of, and they're blockbusters, and we love to see that. It's very exciting. But a lot of the times, they have these ideas that in the old way of doing things would have made it into development, maybe would have launched, but it would not have been successful because it wasn't meeting customers' needs. Now they're killing them at the discovery phase or at the preference interview phase, or maybe it's in the side-by-side testing. And so what they're doing is they're clearing the deck so that when stuff does get to that development stage where they're spending the big bucks, that's where they've got a much, much higher quality and higher success rate. I think that's a pretty good measurement. Start measuring your success rate from the beginning of the development stage.
Thank you, Dan. Can you share a closing thought with our attendees?
Picture this. Picture we're back in the 1960s. We're in the automotive industry. Deming has come along and said we can change things. That's where we're at now. I mean, I believe in 20 years, the way we gather insights for B2B customers is going to be dramatically different. So my recommendation is, yeah, we got a lot of short-term pressures. We've got a lot of things going on, but this can be a pivotal time for your company. I can tell you that when we start working with new clients, this is not being done. So I believe for some period of time, the main competitive advantage when we're thinking about profitable, sustainable, organic growth is in understanding those B2B customer needs far, far better than their competition. I can't guarantee how long this window will last. I think it'll become common practice, as is statistical process control today. But I can tell you there's a gaping window, and I believe the suppliers who close that, who understand their customers' needs very, very well, are going to be richly rewarded.
The resources Dan described are available at www.aimwhitepapers.com. This webcast has been produced by the Product Development and Management Association. On behalf of our presenter, Dan Adams, and the PDMA, thank you for joining us today.